My name is Megan. I do have nice cute sticks in here. Whew. I am 28 years old, and I am here to tell you what happened to me on June 4th, 2012. I was 21 at the time. How many of you know what bridge jumping is? For those of you that don't, it's where you jump off of a bridge into water. It's a common pastime in small towns in southern Minnesota. And on June 4th, 2012, me and my best friend went to the Fillmore County Bridge outside of Chatfield, Minnesota, which is about 30 minutes south of Rochester. I currently live in Rochester. I'm from Rochester. And we went bridge jumping. Usually involved in bridge jumping is drinking copious amounts of alcohol. It was a Monday afternoon, and we got wasted. And on our way back to Chatfield, we got into a crash. So that group of people, by that white truck that you saw a glimpse of, that group of people was helping my friend. And that blob that you see laying in the middle of the road there, that blob is me. This is my car before our crash. This is my car after. We were traveling down County Road 5, which there's a spring under the ground, so there's a small section of the road that cannot be paved. So the road goes from pavement to a small section of gravel and then back to pavement. Those pink lines that you see pictured there are where they estimate that we lost control of my car. We started going off into the ditch this way. When we hit pavement, we started to roll. They estimate that we rolled my car somewhere between 3 and 7 times before going end over end. That circle up there that you see where the red blob is, that's where they found my car. The circle on the shoulder of the road is where they found my friend, sitting up and screaming. And that circle farthest from the car is where they found me, face down, unresponsive, and in respiratory failure. So that gentleman in the blue shirt is a family friend, and all the volunteers in Chatfield, all the firefighters, EMTs in Chatfield, Minnesota are volunteers, and I just so happened to be lucky that day that I knew, or he knew me, and that moment that you see him bending down right there, he's telling me to hold on and to fight for my life. I have no memory of this, but this is what I was told later by all of the firefighters. This is a picture of where my car was found. What you don't know, but what I know, because this is a scene of my crash and I got to read all of the reports, but the little black blob next to my car that's got a little pink hint to it, that's my daughter's booster seat. My daughter was 4 at the time of my crash. My daughter was not in the car with me. However, the fire department did not know that. The fire department ended up launching 2 separate manhunts for what they thought they would find would be her dead body. I eventually was airlifted to St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota, and my friend was taken by ambulance. But this is me before my crash. I was very athletic. I played a lot of intramural sports, 2-hand touch football, basketball, softball, volleyball, you name it, I did it, I lifted. I also was a sprinter. I was very, very, very active. I had to be to keep up with my 4-year-old child. And I was a single mom. I had sole physical custody and joint legal custody. My daughter saw her father every other weekend and for 2 weeks in the summer. I was mom 95% of the time. I also worked a full-time job and then had a part-time job on the side. I was very musical. I've been playing the piano since I was 5. I sang a lot, was very active in the theater community. I also was a full-time college student, and I was always a sober driver. I was that friend that everybody called at 2 o'clock in the morning, Megan, we're wasting, can you come pick us up? And I've driven as far as an hour to pick up friends who were too drunk to drive. I also didn't drink very often. I drank on the weekends that my daughter was with her dad, if I wasn't working, and if I didn't have homework to do. My final memory, the day of my crash, was getting to the bridge with my friend, parking my car, sitting on the trunk of my car, and cracking my first beer, and telling my friend that I was only having one. However, I clearly had more than one because when I got to the hospital, my blood alcohol content level was a 0.18. This is me after. I fractured my skull in 5 places. I severed 2 arteries in my brain and was bleeding to death inside of my head. I received 8 units of blood. I broke my nose. I broke and dislocated my shoulder. I broke 2 ribs. I broke my back in 3 places. I impaled my knee, and 80 to 90% of my body was covered in road rash, cuts, and lacerations. I have had 7 surgeries. My first brain surgery, they removed the left half of my skull to allow the swelling in my brain to go down and to repair the arteries. My second brain surgery, they put the left half of my skull back in. That half of my skull then got infected. I had multiple infections running through my brain, so that led to my third brain surgery. I then did where they had to take out the left half of my skull again. I then did not have the left half of my skull for 8 months, which is why I had to wear that incredibly fashionable helmet you see pictured in my slide there. I had to wear that helmet whenever I was up walking around, sitting down, watching TV, anything that I did that was not sleeping or laying down, I had to wear that helmet. We thought about bedazzling it. My 4th brain surgery, they put in my prosthetic skull. So the left half of my skull is made of a really, really, really tough plastic. It's held in place by 20 screws. So when I say I've got a screw loose, I might not be kidding. I also developed what's called post-traumatic hydrocephalus, which is a fancy term for water on the brain. So our brain has cerebrospinal fluid in it. I call it brain fluid because it's easier to say. And our brain has a natural way of draining that fluid because if too much of that fluid accumulates on the brain, it can cause you to go brain dead. My ventricles became enlarged and they were no longer draining that fluid the way they were supposed to. And so, in my 4th brain surgery, they put in what's called a shunt. In the right side of my brain, in my head, I have a metal valve. Attached to that valve is a plastic tube that goes into my brain. The other end of that tube runs down my neck, through my chest, and into my abdomen. That valve and that tube is what drains my brain fluid for me. I had 2 knee surgeries. At one point, there was talk of possible amputation of my left leg. All of my muscle had detached from bone, and there was no guarantee that I would ever have function of my left leg. I got real lucky. I got to keep my leg, and it works just fine. I'm pretty happy about that. But my first knee surgery, they had to clean out the debris that had gathered in my knee where the hole was, and they put in what's called a wound vac, which is that fancy black circular tubey looking thing, which continued to clean out my knee for approximately 11 days. And then my second knee surgery, they took skin from my right thigh to cover the hole in my left knee. It's also called a skin graft. I then had surgery on my shoulder. I got real lucky because this surgery alone could have killed me. So the way that I had dislocated my shoulder, I dislocated what's called your sternoclavicular joint, which is the joint that attaches your clavicle to your sternum. And the way that I had dislocated it, my clavicle, this bone right here, was resting behind my sternum, which is your chest bone, and it was putting pressure on my heart and growing attached to the artery on the opposite side of my neck. My surgeon, when he came out of this surgery and he went to give report to my parents, his first words, I cut her open, I had the biggest oh shit moment of my life. He told my parents that it was the worst shoulder he's ever seen and the hardest surgery he's ever done. I had to go through all kinds of therapy. So the speech portion of my brain was the most badly affected. And as I stand up here and I tell you guys all of this, you probably would never know it, but I actually used to have a really, really, really bad stutter. And I went through hours and hours and hours of speech therapy. And the only reason you can't tell is because I've given this presentation that many freaking times. That I've gotten so good at saying all of this that you'd never know the difference. But I used to mix up words real bad. I'd say things like, can somebody please go shut the dog? When I meant, can somebody please go shut the door? I'm close, they both start with D, but they're 2 very different words, give the sentence 2 very different meanings. I would talk in what they called word salad, where none of my sentences made any sense. But I was speaking English, and I could not understand why the rest of the world could not understand me. It got very, very complicated, and I was really frustrated because I thought that I made perfect sense. So I had to go through hours of speech therapy. I also had to go through a lot of physical therapy. I was told the first time I walked after my crash was 2 or 3 weeks later, and that I had to have 3 people helping me. I had to use a walker, and I screamed the whole way because it hurt so bad. I don't have any memory of this. This is what was told to me. But they had to reteach me how to walk up and down stairs, how to physically get myself out of bed, how to tie my tennis shoes, how to put clothes on my body, how to bathe myself. Everything you guys do on a regular basis without even thinking about it, I had to learn how to do all over again. I then had to go to occupational therapy, which is similar to being in elementary school all over again. They'd ask me simple math questions like, Megan, what's 2 plus 2? I go, oh, I got this, 5. They'd be like, ooh, not quite. And I go, damn. And then they had to reteach me how to tell time. They'd make me draw pictures of a clock over and over and over again, and I would get it all wrong. They'd give me a recipe. They'd put me in a kitchen. They'd tell me to cook something. And when it came out tasting like shit, I go, well, what did I do wrong? They'd be like, well, it called for 3 tablespoons of sugar, not 3 tablespoons of salt. And I'd be like, oh, darn. But they made me do all of these things to make sure that as a 22-year-old, I was 21 when the crash happened, but I turned 22 while I was in the hospital the first time, to make sure that eventually I'd be able to be home alone without burning the house down and hurting myself. And then I had to go to general therapy just to make sure that I was dealing with life after the crash and life after the brain injury effectively. My physical consequences. So, because I had that infection in my brain, I had an abscess resting on my motor strip, which caused complete paralysis of my right arm and hand. Before my crash, I was right hand dominant. My right hand was then paralyzed for about 8 months. I am now pretty ambidextrous. My left hand is actually more dominant than my right in some aspects. I have full function back in my right hand. However, my right hand is considerably weaker than my left, and I will never regain the kind of function that I had before my crash. For example, I don't have fine motor skills in my thumb like I used to, and I can't text on my cell phone with my right hand at all. I have to use my cell phone with my left hand. Or I freak out my classmates. I'm a law student at St. Thomas right now. And if we're in a long class, my hand will get tired real quick. My right hand will from taking notes. So I'll switch to my left halfway through, and people will go, oh my God, what is this sorcery? So I'm pretty ambidextrous because my right hand had to take over from my left. But can you imagine trying to tie your tennis shoes with one hand? Next to impossible unless you get your teeth involved. Or imagine there's a big juicy steak sitting in front of you. How do you cut that with one hand? You don't. My parents had to. Or buttoning your jeans. That game changes. I can tell you that. Like playing the piano, that was real fun. Not impossible, totally did it, but that's pretty hard to do one-handed. I also became an epileptic. That infection caused me to start having seizures. At one point, I was on 3 different seizure medications multiple times a day. I am proud to say I have now been seizure-free for over 3 years and off of all seizure medication for a couple of years now. Pretty pumped about that, pretty excited about that. But having seizures affects your ability to drive, in case you didn't know. Then I also started randomly fainting. There's no medical explanation for this whatsoever. I would just be walking along and bam, I'd hit the ground and people would go, what do we do? Should we call 911? Then I'd get up and I'd be like, hey guys, I got it, it's good, go about your business, I'm cool. And they'd be like, what? Should we call somebody? I'd be like, no, I'm good, it's cool. There's nobody's ever able to explain why that happened, and knock on metal, that I haven't fainted in a really long time, I hope I don't. I have pain everywhere, all the time, every day. It's just kind of a chronic part of my life. I have multiple headaches every day. I suffer from debilitating migraines. I usually get at least one of those a week. I'm on a medication to help me deal with my headaches, and then I'm on a different medication to help me deal with my migraines. But I would say by far my back pain is the worst. So I fractured 3 vertebrae. I fractured them in a way that I now have permanent compression fractures, which has led to the beginnings of scoliosis, meaning my spine is no longer straight. Because of that, I have pretty significant back pain. But my spine is not curved enough that I qualify for surgery yet. So I recently discovered what's called radiofrequency ablations. This is the only thing that I have found that manages my pain for me. Every 6 months I go in and they do 2 separate procedures where they stick 10-inch needles into the 6 joints in my back, and they heat the ends of those needles up to 275 degrees Fahrenheit, and they burn off the ends of my nerves so that I can't feel pain. Because if you don't have nerves, you can't feel anything. But nerves regenerate, and so those nerves eventually grow back, and when those nerves grow back, I have to go back and have these procedures done again. Funny thing about these procedures is because they deal with the back, which sometimes plays a role in sending messages to the legs, they cannot put you to sleep for these procedures. I have to be awake throughout the entire thing to be able to tell them whether or not they're burning the wrong nerve, whether or not I'm feeling things going down my legs. But I will take that 20 minutes of unpleasantness for the 6 months of 95% pain relief that it gives me. Because on a bad back day, I can't get out of bed and I can't walk. And so, whatever it takes. I also have scars everywhere on my body. So I was in a 2-piece bathing suit when I was ejected from my car. I've got scars on my butt cheeks, guys. I've got over 50 scars on my left leg alone. I've got scars on my toes, my ankles, my shoulders, my arms, my hands, my stomach, my back, everywhere. When my head is shaved, it looks like a road map. Pretty sure you can mark an X somewhere, find some treasure. I have scars everywhere. I also have a dent. So, because of my prosthetic skull, they can't put a screw this close to my eye, so I do not have any skull right here. Most people say they don't notice it until I point it out, but I do indeed have an actual dent in my head. The only other time that people notice it is when I'm eating. If I had a piece of gum in my mouth right now, your chewing muscle is right here, and you all would be able to see my chewing muscle move. It's a little bit gross, so it's a really good thing that I don't watch myself eat in the mirror. The left side of my forehead is completely paralyzed. I cannot raise both of my eyebrows. I'm actively trying to right now. Doesn't happen. I can squint them, can't raise them. I didn't find this out until about 1.5 years after my crash when somebody came up to me and was like, Megan, I love how you always raise one eyebrow. And I was like, what? I've never been able to do that. I spent 45 minutes in the bathroom in front of the mirror trying to raise both of my eyebrows. It does not happen. I promise you. I also have a 50% higher chance of having a stroke before the age of 55 because of my traumatic brain injury. They think that I might have had a mini stroke a couple of years ago. If that is indeed what happened, I can promise you it is the most terrifying thing in the world. I was at work and I lost feeling on the right side of my body, and I was unable to tell somebody what was going on. I went up to a coworker and I started crying because I was like, pretty sure somebody needs to call 911 is what I'm thinking in my head. I could not get those words out. They were looking at me like, what's up, Megan? And I'm like, nothing. They're like, I'm gonna call your dad. But then by the time I got to the ER, everything had cleared up, all of my symptoms had gone away. I explained to the people what had happened. They're like, we're pretty sure you had a mini stroke because that's why nothing's showing up on the CT scan, but based on your symptoms, we don't know what else it could be. It was terrifying, I can promise you that. I also have an increased risk of infection because of that shunt, that tube that goes from my brain to my abdomen. It goes through more than half of my body. My husband calls my shunt a super highway for infectious disease. If my shunt ever got infected, it would carry an infection through more than half of my body at a really rapid rate, making me really sick really fast. Shunts also malfunction. 50% of shunts malfunction within the first 2 years of placement. The other 50% malfunction within the first 5 years of placement. My shunt was placed in the March of 2013. We are almost in 2019. The odds of my shunt malfunctioning sometime in the near future, pretty freaking high. Which means if my shunt malfunctions, I'm gonna have to have a 5th brain surgery. Not really looking forward to that because my hair has finally grown back. Anyways, I can do the rest without slideshow. So my legal consequences. Before I go into my legal consequences, I want to make it very clear. My friend is very much alive. She's very much with us. She did not die. She was injured in this crash. However, I cannot go into the details of her injuries. I cannot go into the details of her story because that is her story to share, not mine. I'm here to talk about what happened to me and not her. So if you raise your hand and you ask me a question about what happened to her, I will not answer it, so don't bother. I was charged with 6 felony counts of criminal vehicular homicide or operation, 3 gross misdemeanor counts of criminal vehicular homicide or operation, 2 counts of DWI, 1 count of careless and reckless driving, 1 count of, holy cow, 1 count of careless driving, and 1 count of no insurance. Because the one time in my life that I don't wear my seatbelt, it's the one time in my life that I'm in a drinking and driving crash, which is also the one time in my life that my car insurance had lapsed 10 days before my crash because I was in between jobs and I had just moved back home. I ended up making an Alford plea, which essentially means that I pled guilty to a gross misdemeanor criminal vehicular homicide or operation. Everything else was dropped. I was sentenced to 30 days in jail, 2 years of probation, 90 hours of community service. I've given this talk for over 150 hours and did close to 5,000 people. My license was also revoked for 5 years, and that was a little bit wild. You don't realize how much you use something or how much you need something until it's gone. I was eligible to get my work permit about a year after my revocation began. I did not get my work permit until about 4 years into the revocation because the cost of insurance was absolutely insane. There was no way that I could afford to pay for my car insurance and buy a new car, any of that. It was nutty. There's no way I could do it. So I also had to deal with a family case because, like I said earlier, before my crash, I had sole physical custody of my daughter. Well, while I was in the hospital, her dad petitioned the court for emergency custody so he could take care of her while I was dealing with all of my injuries, all of my surgeries, and with the idea that when I was done with all of that we would go back to our original custody order. Well, when that time came, he did not want to go back to the original custody order. We then entered into a 2-year-long custody battle, which was not fun. No custody battle ever is, but ours was especially brutal because of my criminal record and because of my traumatic brain injury. He basically was questioning my ability to be a mom. And I can't even put into words what that kind of thing feels like. I also then was sued. So usually when you get into a car crash, your insurance takes care of things. Because I didn't have insurance at the time of my crash, my friend's parents filed for an uninsured driver's claim with her car insurance company to help cover her medical expenses. Usually what then would happen is that her car insurance company would go after my car insurance company for reimbursement. But because I did not have car insurance, her car insurance company came after me. They sued me for $123,000. To put that in perspective, that is a small house. Or you could go to most public colleges like 4 times and get 4 different bachelor's degrees on that. Or you could buy like 6 brand new cars with that kind of money. That's a lot of freaking money. I got very, 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 very lucky, and I want to stress that point a lot, that I had a very stellar attorney who found that her insurance company, some administrative assistant somewhere made some clerical error on a form, and he got everything dropped. That is not the norm. And so I got very lucky. Had that not happened and had a judgment been made on that lawsuit, I would be paying on that. My wages would be getting garnished until that judgment was satisfied. So those are my criminal consequences. My financial consequences. So, I don't know if you knew this, but nobody gets to go to jail for free. The 30 days that I spent in jail cost over $400. And then to be on probation for 2 years cost another $400. And that's not including the cost of my attorney or the court costs. For my civil, criminal, and family case, my parents and I have put over $100,000 into my attorney at an 8% interest rate. That's nuts. I'm pretty sure I paid for his kids to go to college. How crazy is that? And then, I had really great health insurance, but even great health insurance doesn't come without a cost. There's still deductibles and co-pays, those kinds of things. So out of pocket, I've paid close to $50,000 with all of my medical bills, and that will never end, is the thing too, because my injuries don't ever end. I still have to see my neurologist. I still have to see orthosurgeons. I still have to see all of my specialists every once in a while. So my medical bills don't ever stop. So that number continues to grow. And at one point, my health insurance company sent my dad a letter saying, she's hit the $1 million mark, we're tired of paying for her. You should find another insurance company for her. My dad had to threaten them with a lawsuit and with a lawyer in order for me to maintain my insurance. I didn't even know that it was an option that they could kick me off of my insurance. But yeah, that happened. And then, so usually when you're in a car crash and you total your car insurance helps take care of things, right? Well, I still had like a $4,000 loan on my car, and I totaled my car. There was no way that thing was drivable. And because I did not have insurance, as soon as the bank that had provided the loan found out that I had totaled my car, I received a letter saying, we expect final payment. And they gave me like 30 days to pay it. So before all of this, I had 3 retirement accounts and a Roth IRA investment account. I had to cash all of that out to be able to pay any of these bills, and I was still in debt. So, just for the EMTs to show up at the crash was $200. Just for the fire department to show up at the crash was $200. And then I was unable to work for over a year, so I lost over $40,000 in potential income, right? So, how am I supposed to pay for all this stuff? Eventually, my medical bills went to collections. I've since paid all that stuff off, but I'm still accruing bills related to this crash. Those are my financial consequences. My social consequences. So before this crash, I had what I thought was a stellar group of friends, those people that would, be there for me through thick or thin, my ride or dies. When I got out of the hospital the first time and I couldn't be their sober driver anymore or their party pal anymore, I figured out really quick that I was just their drinking buddy. I haven't heard from most of them since. I definitely learned who my friends were. I also have not spoken to my biological mother and most of her family in over 5 years, directly related to this crash. It's a little bit crazy, but whatever. And then the public, people, not kind. I was bald for the better part of 2 years because of my brain surgeries, and it's not really a norm for a 22-year-old chick to be bald, right? I think I killed it. Totally think I rocked that G.I. Jane look, but the public didn't. My favorite story to tell about this, so we're getting to the best part of the presentation where I start to tell these really funny stories. My favorite story to tell about this was right after my 4th brain surgery. My daughter had just turned 5, and I was taking her swimming for the very first time since my crash. This was about a year after my crash, and I was so pumped because I had just gotten my stitches and staples removed from my head, and I had just gotten clearance to take her swimming for the first time, where I could actually get in the pool. I can't stress that enough. I was so excited. So we get to the pool. This is also the first time that I had worn a bathing suit since my crash. And I was like, you know what? I am going to rock that 2-piece. I don't care about all of my scars. I don't care what other people think. So we're at the pool. And we're swimming. We're having a good time. She tells me she's got to go to the bathroom. So I take her into the building to go to the bathroom. As we're walking back out, we walk past this table with 2 50 or 60-year-old women sitting there. And as we walk by, one of them goes, oh my God, what happened to her? Mind you, I'm freshly bald. I have this big brand new scar across my chest from my shoulder surgery. I have these brand new fresh scars on my head. I'm like just crushing these scars, right? I kept walking because I was like, I'm not going to give these women the time of day. I've been dealing with comments like this for a little over a year. I just didn't care. My then 5-year-old daughter, however, had a completely different idea. And she turned around and she cocked her hip out and she put her hands on her hips. And she goes, my mom almost died. My mom was in a real bad car crash. She had to have a lot of surgeries. You mean old ladies need to stop talking about her. And part of me was like, that's my girl. I was so proud that she stood up for what she saw as an injustice. But that was also the moment where it smacked me square between the eyes that my decisions on June 4th, 2012 didn't just affect me. And I remember going home that night, and I remember crying a lot. Because it was that moment that I realized that my decisions impacted so many people. I've always thought of myself as a pretty damn good mom, but it was in that moment that I realized on June 4th, 2012, I made the shittiest decision a mom could ever make. And then, so I've been giving these talks at victim impact panels and at the Fillmore County DARE program all over the place since 2013. But it was about 6 months ago. I was in Mankato at a victim impact panel to a group about this size. And so my daughter comes with me. She's almost 11 now. And when she comes, she usually sits in a chair up at the front, and she just likes to watch. And I was telling that story, and she usually smiles and chuckles. And then she'll start to tear up when I start to tear up. And I got to that moment, and I realized that in all of these years, I've never apologized to her. And without intending to that day, without going there with the goal in mind, I ended up making a very public apology to her in front of 100 strangers. I told her how sorry I was for the bad decisions that I made. But what really stood out to me that day was that after we left, we get in the car and we're driving home, and I apologized to her again because I said, I'm really sorry that I kind of laid that on you without any preparation and in front of a bunch of strangers. You know, it was kind of a private moment. I'm really sorry that I did that in front of this group of people. And she goes, it's okay, Mom. She goes, I do have one question, though. And I was like, what's your question? She goes, did you mean it? I said, Lydia, I meant every freaking word. I love you, and I'm so sorry for the crappy choice that I made and how much it affected you. And she started to cry, and she goes, you know what, Mom? I forgave you a long time ago. And I think that speaks to the strength that my child has. But to me, that's just stupid remarkable, because I don't deserve that kind of forgiveness in my mind. But so then it was a couple months after that, I was at that exact same victim impact panel in Mankato. I was telling the story that I just told you. I realized there's another person in this world that I owe an apology to. My freaking friend. Come on. I'm like, are you stupid, Megan? I'm standing up here and I'm like, oh my God. I haven't apologized to my friend. It's been 6 years since this freaking crash that destroyed both of our lives, and I haven't said I'm sorry to her. What kind of friend am I? We're still friends, but what kind of friend am I? What kind of bullshit is that? And then, so I left that panel, I called her, started crying, I apologized to her, she apologized to me, blah, blah, blah. It was beautiful, it was great. But then I went home that night and I was like, why did it take me so long? The only answer I have for that, those screams that you heard in the beginning, so all of that is from the dash cam of the scene of my crash. Those screams that you heard in the video, I live with those screams all the damn time. And if I apologized to her, that meant that I was accepting responsibility for the fact that I caused those screams. And I can assure you that that is one of the hardest things to live with. So you might, so then it was after this that I was like, well, shit, I owe somebody else an apology. Her freaking mom. But you know what's crazy? I was 10 times more afraid of apologizing to her mother than I was of apologizing to her. Because I admire her mom, and because if I was her mom, I would hate me a little bit, for what I did. So I kind of chickened out, couldn't do it in person or over the phone. I did it via Facebook, but something's better than nothing. And her mom just responded and said, Megan, I forgave you forever ago. I love you. Like, I know that you're sorry. I've known for a long time. And I just said, to me, it's like the grace of this woman is amazing. I can't fathom it. I can't fathom that kind of forgiveness. But what all of this made me realize is when I met these victim impact panels, I look at this. You guys might not see it like this. I think that you're the lucky ones because you got pulled over. And there are so many times that I wish that somebody would have pulled me over because then I wouldn't have to stand up here and tell this to you. But then I also say that and I have to reflect on the fact that I got really damn lucky too. Because I could not be here, first of all, for two reasons. One, I could be dead and buried, or two, I could be in prison because I killed my best friend. So I'm grateful that I get to be here. And I'm grateful that all of you are here. And I will second on what Marcia said, that this is your second chance, and frickin' jump on it, leap at it, be super excited, grab it by the frickin' horns, like do whatever you gotta do. But anyways, I'm like getting really short on time here. So, because of my brain injury, I suffer from what's called overstimulation. Another term for it is flooding. Best story to explain this is the weekend that I met my now in-laws. Was Easter weekend. If you've ever been to a church service on Easter weekend, you know that it's like one of the busiest times of the year, so everybody's there, right? I was thinking, okay, we're gonna go to church. I can sit in the back pew, I can make a quick escape if I need to. Well, little did I know that my husband's family likes to sit in like the second pew. And so if you've ever been to a church service, you know that usually when the pastor is making his sermon, he's walking around up front really emphatically with big hand gestures because he's really trying to drive his point home, right? And then there might be a clock. And if there is a clock, it's usually got a second hand, and the second hand is ticking. And you can hear that. And there's usually a couple of kids that are sitting behind you that are whispering to each other while they're coloring, and their parents are going, shh. And then those kids, they probably have older siblings who are sitting there on their cell phones. Their parents are going, put that away. And then while all of this is happening, whoever plays the piano or organ is flipping through the book, the hymnal, to make sure that they're ready for the next hymn, right? And then they're adjusting their piano bench or their organ bench. And then if there's a choir up in front, they might be like swishing their robes or adjusting their robes, making sure that they're on the right page for the next hymnal, all of this. So I was so proud of myself. I was super pumped when I made it through this whole sermon. I was like, all right, just get me out of here. We're good. We're golden. We stand up. You know how, like, at the end of the church service, everybody stands up all at once and everybody starts talking. That's a lot of stimuli. My brain doesn't handle a lot of stimuli coming in all at once. So I'm like, okay, just get me out of here. Just get me out of here. So we're starting to leave. Mind you, I'm in Georgia. This is my first time in Georgia. Never been there. Mind you, this is also the first time I've ever met most of my husband's entire family. I did not know the people sitting in the pew behind us. However, my husband did. Whoever they were, they wanted an introduction. And they go, John, who's this? And somebody puts their hand on the small of my back, and that was all that it took to send me over the edge. I started pushing my husband, I started crying, and I was like, get me out of here! I'm sure the entire congregation was like, oh my God, who is that crazy lady up in front? I'm sure that my husband's entire family is like, oh my God, who did our son and brother bring home? I'm like, what? So we finally get outside. I'm crying. I'm like, oh my God, this is just awful. It's super dramatic, right? My now mother-in-law comes up to my husband and I. She goes, so I think that we're not going to stay for the lunch. We're just going to go home. And I'm like, oh, I ruined everybody's Easter. So that is a small snippet of what it looks like when I get incredibly overwhelmed and overstimulated because my filter system just doesn't work like everybody else's. Now my husband and I have a pretty solid system worked out where if I'm starting to feel that I'm getting overwhelmed, I'll just elbow him and tell him to get me out of here. And he'll go, we gotta go home and feed the dog. And he'll come up with some random stupid excuse and people are like, yep, that sounds like a John thing. And it just works. works. It just makes sense, and he'll get me out of there. So I was 21, like I said, when I was in this crash. Turned 22 while I was in the hospital, and I was single. Dating, first of all, is not a really pleasant experience when you're not bald and a single mom and all of that jazz. Let me tell you about dating after you've been in this kind of a crash. So my first date with my husband went a little something like this. Usually when you're on your first date, you try to put your best face forward, right? Not when you're me, apparently. So I did not have a lot of hair. And we were at lunch, and we sat down, and I said, so, I was in a drinking and driving crash, had 4 brain surgeries, I spent 30 days in jail. I'm currently on probation. I'm in the process of being sued for $123,000. I'm also in the middle of a custody battle. I'm a single mom. I still live at home with my parents. I had surgery on my shoulder. I had 2 surgeries on my knees. I'm in the process of getting my bachelor's degree. I intend to go to law school. I have no idea what my future looks like physically. I have no idea if I'll ever be able to have kids. I have no idea what the long-term effects of my brain injury are going to be. I have no idea what the long-term effects of my back being broken are going to be. I don't talk to the biological mother's side of the family. I want to go on a second date. His response was, I got depression and I live with a lesbian. And I was like, all right, cool. And then we got married 8 months later, literally. And when we had our big wedding, my friend was the friend that I was in this crash with, she was a bridesmaid in our wedding, and her mom was in the audience. And her mom wrote this really great thing on Facebook about how, I have the quote on my presentation. It said, 3 years ago, I watched 2 girls struggling to find normal. Today, I watched both of them walk down the aisle, one beautifully radiant, one of them as the bride, the other followed by the bride. One of them is bridesmaid, followed by the bride. She talks about how she couldn't stop the tears. I always mention this because I think that this is a good testimony of the fact that not only did my decisions affect a lot of people, my friends' decisions affected a lot of people, but I also talk about this because my wedding was an incredibly emotional day because nobody expected me to live through this. Like, me being here is freaking remarkable. It's incredible. My nickname at Mayo Clinic, by the way, is the Defier because I defied the Grim Reaper so many times. But my surgeons met my parents in the hallways. They were wheeling me into my first brain surgery, and they told my parents to say their final goodbyes because they didn't think that I was going to make it out of surgery. So while I was in my first brain surgery, my parents were planning my funeral. And so I just think that it's incredible. But I also bring this up because you know how when you get married, you get a car insurance discount? My husband, when we got hitched, he was so excited to get that married person discount because I don't understand it, but apparently being married makes you a more responsible driver. So he calls Geico, and he was like giving them all my information. He's like, yeah, I got married, give me that discount. And they're like, oh, Megan Pierce Campbell's your wife. We see she's got a revoked license. She's got a criminal record. They gave him 30 days to find a new car insurance company. So how fair is that? My husband got kicked off of his car insurance because he chose to marry me. Then, this is the last thing. Almost done, promise, less than 5 minutes. So in March of this year, I was in a second car crash. I lost control on some ice, hit a guardrail head on, and my airbags deployed. I was knocked unconscious briefly. I bring this up because I want you to know that because of the seriousness of my first traumatic brain injury, any time that I get what would be a concussion for the rest of you, it is automatically a moderate traumatic brain injury. Concussions are not even an option for me anymore. Me hitting my head and being briefly knocked unconscious sent me back to speech therapy, screwed up my whole speech processing center again, put me back in physical therapy. I had to go back to my neurologist because it can rekindle seizure activity. And I tell you all of this because I want you to understand that from now on, my future, anytime that I injure myself, I risk permanent brain defects. And it's a little bit scary. That's also what led to my husband and I deciding that pregnancy was not an option for us, and we decided that we were going to adopt. We don't think that my body can handle a pregnancy. So we decided that we were going to be foster parents. We were going to adopt through the foster care system. Well, my criminal background check, they automatically denied me. I did not know that when I made my Alfred plea that would be a possibility. that I would not be able to do that. So anything regarding the Department of Human Services, I cannot be licensed by the Department of Human Services, nor can I work at a facility that is licensed by the Department of Human Services unless I'm granted a reconsideration. I was not granted a reconsideration, but I was granted a variance. So I basically am on year-long probation, and I have to reapply for a variance every year until my disqualification period ends. But I went through all this work to become a foster mom, and we are this close. We have one more home visit, and we will be licensed as foster parents. So I'm pretty pumped about that, but I wanted you to know that it takes that much more work because of my criminal background, because I have that gross misdemeanor. A simple DWI is a little bit better. Don't let it become a gross misdemeanor, is what I'm saying. I also want to point out, before my crash, I had perfect vision, did not have glasses. I now have glasses, and my vision starts to decline. Before my crashes, I had perfect hearing. My right eardrum does not react to noise. I'll eventually have to have a cochlear implant in place. And I have virtually no sense of smell. So you know my husband's farts are really raunchy if I can smell them. My taste buds changed. I cannot taste food if it's not spicy. Literally, I have to carry hot sauce around in my purse in order to be able to taste food. And I'm looking at least three more surgeries in the next 5 years. One on my neck, one on my back, and one on my ears because of this crash. So my whole point is you don't have to be an alcoholic to be in a crash like this. You don't have to drink every weekend to be in a crash like this. My other point is that this is not a you get hurt, you get better, life goes on. This is not a you go to jail, you get off probation, life goes on. I want you to see the lasting life consequences and how it affects every area of your life. Are there any questions? Sorry, my PowerPoint threw up on us. Go ahead.
From the time of the accident until you received help, how much of a time span was there?
It was very minimal. So literally, it is. I'm not a very religious person, but it is by the grace of God that I am here because it was on a country road. It was a Monday afternoon, so everybody's at work, and there's not very good cell reception out there. And so where our crash happened, there's a house up on the hill right above that area, and the person who lived in that house did not get cell service inside of his house, so he had stepped out onto his porch to try to make a phone call, and he just so happened to hear our crash. He did not see it, so he walked down his driveway to see what happened and what he had heard, and he found me and my friend in the road. And so then he flagged down the next car that otherwise would have hit me. And he stopped them. That's who was standing over my body when you saw the fire truck arrive. He just stood there to make sure that I did not get hit by a car. And then he flagged down somebody else and told them to go up to the top of the hill and call 911. So it was literally seconds before somebody found us. But had that not been the case, I would have bled to death internally, and I wouldn't have made it to the hospital. I asked my neurosurgeon how much time I would have had I not had surgery when I did, and he said less than 15 minutes. Anybody else?
Was there a lot of accidents that happened on that road?
I wouldn't say a lot. This specific stretch is known for there being crashes. I think that this is the second crash that could have resulted in serious fatalities. I know that one has resulted in a fatality, and I believe that was also alcohol related.
Have they paved it?
No, because there's a spring under the ground that causes the pavement to shift, which would mean that they would have to continue to pave it every couple of years. So it's posted, there's signs, you're supposed to slow down, that kind of a thing. I know that people have tried to fight the city council and whatnot to pave it, and it just hasn't gotten anywhere. Go ahead. I'm sorry, ask a question again? Say it again? Honestly, I don't know. I have no memory after my final memory of getting to the bridge that day, so I have no idea. It could have been that we were speeding because we were just having the time of our lives. It could have been that I wasn't paying attention. I could have been texting. I had no freaking clue. I could have been going 20 miles an hour for all I know. Pretty sure you don't flip a car 7 times, so you're going 20 miles an hour. No, I had driven on that road. I knew that road. I mean, that was not my first time bridge jumping at that bridge. So, I really don't know what happened.
Did your friend remember what happened?
Nope. Neither one of us. Which complicated things greatly. Anybody else? Thank you guys for listening.